If you've ever worried about getting scammed by illustrators for your beautiful children's book, this video is for you. This is going to be a long one to really ensure we know what to look out for and how to protect ourselves. So buckle up. Hi there, I'm Eevi, an award-winning children's author and ghostwriter over at eevijones.com and the creator of Children's Book University. I create videos specifically for children's authors, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my weekly videos. For most aspiring children's authors, the illustration part of the book creation process is the most complex and nerve-wracking because we are putting our work, our vision into someone else's hand. And more often than not, it'll be a person we have never met and with whom we will communicate only via email or over the phone. And that is precisely what makes an author so very vulnerable to scams when it comes to working with an illustrator. Over the years, I have observed so many Illustrator scams, and many of these scams involve the use of clip art or pre-made illustrations, and more recently also AI-generated illustrations. To be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong if an illustrator provides us with clip art or pre-made illustrations for our children's book. That is, as long as the author is made aware that clip art and pre-made illustrations have been used. Because whether or not we're using these types of images should be our decision, right? Not that of the illustrator. Whenever we are commissioning an illustrator to illustrate our book, we are usually expecting and looking for original work that has been created specifically for our book and our book only, right? So we want to make sure that we are receiving just that. The problem though is that many aspiring children's authors do not know the difference between original art and pre-made images. Most believe the art they have purchased is one of a kind and has been created specifically for their children's book. So in order to prevent this kind of scamming, it is really important to understand how pre-made and also AI-generated images differ from book-specific and custom-made illustrations and how to spot them. And that's what this video is all about. I truly believe that being scammed this way is absolutely preventable, especially when we know what to look out for. And that's why I really wanted to make this video. So we'll look at 1. What clip art and pre-made images are and why we should care whether or not an illustrator is using clip art for our illustrations. 2. 5 sure telltale signs and examples that let us know our illustrator is using pre-made images or AI for our illustrations. And 3, how we can dig deeper so we can prevent any scams to begin with, where I share my biggest ninja tip when it comes to preventing being taken advantage of by an illustrator. Now, before we jump in, I wanted to add this really important side note here. To demonstrate how to go about identifying clip art, I have added sample illustrations to each scenario, which I have downloaded from either Canva or Shutterstock, one of many stock image sites. Please note that these are sample illustrations only. The original artists of these clip art and these pre-made images are not the culprits. They are simply the original illustrators that create the images in clip art. The culprits are those who then use these images and resell them as their own to us authors without letting us know they have used pre-made images. So that's a really important distinction. The clip art artists who are offering their pre-made images are doing nothing wrong. Now, what are clip art or pre-made images, and why should we care whether or not an illustrator is using those types of images in our illustrations? Clip art is a type of graphic art. It's essentially pre-made images that are sold and made available for license by paying a fee to both the original artists that created them and a stock agency like Shutterstock that managed them. Clip art or pre-made images can be used for all sorts of things. For example, if teachers want to create new worksheets or handouts, they might be using pre-made images. Or if we want to create an invitation over on Canva, we are most likely using pre-made images. Now you may be wondering, Eevi, why does it matter whether or not an illustrator is using clip art or pre-made images for my children's book? Why should I care? As I already mentioned, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with using clip art for children's books. That is, as long as the illustrator discloses that they are using pre-made images in their illustrations. But before agreeing to the use of pre-made art, there are 2 important things we should know about pre-made images. 1, by using clip art in our illustrations, our illustrator might be violating the governing image license agreements. So let's say you want a dog in your illustrations. So the illustrator goes onto a site like Shutterstock, finds a pre-made image of a dog, and purchases that image. Depending on the site these images have been purchased from, the use of these pre-made images might be limited. Oftentimes, again, depending on the site these images are from, reselling someone else's art usually requires an enhanced image license, which is more expensive than a simple standard image license. So if we should decide to allow our illustrator to use pre-made images, we want to make sure to A, know where the illustrator got the clip art from so we can read up on that site's licensing rules, and B, have our illustrator show us the purchase license for each of the used clip art elements. And the second thing we should know about the use of clip art or pre-made images is that our illustrations won't be unique to our book, because the same pre-made images are being sold over and over again by the original creator, the original copyright holder, as well as our illustrator who purchased the rights to use them. So let's say we decide not to have our illustrator use pre-made images for our illustrations, and that instead we want to ensure that they are using original work only. There are certain telltale signs that can help us identify whether or not pre-made art has been used for our commissioned work. And so to help you develop an eye for it, let's look at 5 typical characteristics of clip art. Telltale sign number 1 is if we see the same or a limited number of different poses of a character over and over again throughout the different illustrations of our book. With pre-made clip art, it is very common to see the same basic body over and over again, with some changes made to the arms perhaps, and legs and facial expressions. Oftentimes, pre-made characters can be bought as a set that holds different poses of that same character. This, for example, shows 2 sets of characters with different expressions and poses. We see the same dog from different angles and sides, and a little girl with differing expressions, arms, and legs. These sets are called character sheets and are very common. And so what scamming artists do is they purchase and use these character sheets and then combine them into illustrations by adding things like a background and other objects to make it look like they have created the illustration. So here I took a character from each sheet and combined them into separate scenes. And so to an untrained and unsuspecting eye, this may look like a beautiful and unique illustration. But if we look closely, we can see that even though these 2 characters appear in the same illustration, they don't seem to be interacting with one another. They look like they have been placed there and not drawn there. And so we will want to pay special attention to how our characters interact with one another. It's fairly easy to find a character sheet of one character with changing positions, but very rarely do we see them interacting with a second character. And so scamming illustrations will have to combine them. And so we will want to look out for that. Now, digging a bit deeper here, we can see that not only are these characters here not unique, but the background isn't either. All these background elements are pre-made clip art too, like the tree, the sun, the carpet and couch, and even the window. None of it was uniquely drawn, but simply picked from places like Shutterstock or Canva even. And again, what that means is that our illustrations were not uniquely drawn specifically for our book. Instead, anybody can go onto Shutterstock or Canva and use these same elements. Telltale sign number 2 is if the body of our characters in our illustrations all seem to look the same. Here the characters look very similar to cutout paper dolls almost, where the body stays the same while only the clothing changes and perhaps even the hair. This right here is a great example. Even though they are all meant to be different characters, they all look the same. Only the clothing has been changed and the hairstyle and hair color. And sometimes these illustrators then simply flip or mirror a character to make it seem a bit different. So when looking at our individual illustrations, we will want to make sure we compare them with one another and pay special attention to each character and how it changes from illustration to illustration. Telltale sign number 3 is if the proportions of the different characters and elements to one another seem off. Here we will want to compare the different characters to one another and mostly pay attention to 2 things. 1, we'll want to look at the size of the head and make sure it is similar and not too different between the different characters. So here, for example, we see that the girl's head is much bigger than that of the woman's, and the man's head is humongous compared to those 2 other heads. And 2, we will want to look at the overall body proportions and again compare them to one another. For example, looking at the man here, the head takes up about 1/3 of the entire body, and so do his legs and his trunk. trunk. These proportions are completely different for the woman. Here her head is tiny, probably about 1/5 of the body, with her trunk and her legs proportionately much bigger than her head. We can do the same with things like the hands or the arms and even the eyes. For example, the girl's eyes are proportionately so much bigger than the woman's eyes. And so what these types of vast differences in these three characters would tell us here is that they were probably created by three different clip art artists. Telltale sign number 4 is if the illustration style between the different elements differs. Here's another sample illustration I put together using pre-made images. All were created by different artists. So here are some ways we can detect whether or not a number of different styles are present. First, we can look at whether or not an element has an outline or not, and whether that outline is consistent for all the different elements. Usually, an artist doesn't switch back and forth between drawing things with and without an outline. They usually choose one or the other for one and the same illustration. So if we see an illustration where some items are with an outline and some aren't, that's a great indicator that the scene or illustration has been created using pre-made images. For example, in this illustration right here, we see that some of these elements have a black outline, like the chair and the clock, and some elements do not, like the floor lamp, the dog, and the standing girl. We can also see that where the items do have an outline, the outline isn't consistent. So for example, the chair has a thick black outline, while the girl sitting in it has a very thin black outline. And the lamp next to the TV has a thin brown outline. Second, we can look at the overall look of the different elements. For example, the chair and the drawers behind the chair are very symmetrical, very boxy and linear looking. Other elements like the TV and the TV stand, on the other hand, look very asymmetrical, using a lot more freeform here. Again, illustrators don't usually switch up their illustration style within an illustration, so seeing such a switch is a pretty good indicator that this has been put together using different elements by different clip art creators. And third, we can look at how shadows have been used and whether the elements are drawn in 2D or 3D. For example, in this image right here, we can see a drop shadow below the standing girl and the boy, while none of the other elements have a shadow. And only the books on the floor are drawn three-dimensionally, while everything else is shown as a flat 2D image. And finally, Telltale sign number 5 is all about illustrations generated by AI. Because AI is such a new as well as controversial topic right now, I actually made a whole separate video just on AI alone, where I talk about what it is and how it is impacting the lives of both authors as well as illustrators right now. I've added the link to it in the description below. With the rise of this new tool, I have already heard of so many scams involving AI-generated images, where illustrators have been trying to sell these images to authors without letting these authors know that they were AI-generated. As of right now, there are still a number of telltales that give away that an image may be AI-generated. So let's take a look so we know what to look out for. These right here are a number of AI-generated images. And the first thing we want to pay attention to are the hands and feet. As of right now, AI still has some trouble depicting fingers and toes properly, where sometimes we end up with more or less toes and fingers, so we want to make sure to always look at the hands and feet. Second, we should look closely at the eyes. As of right now, the eyes still don't look quite right, where oftentimes the eye shape and also the eyeballs are not symmetrical. So we want to make sure to zoom in on those eyes whenever we get an illustration from an illustrator. Third, we should look closely at the teeth. Just like with the eyes, the left and right side of the teeth are often not symmetrical. And fourth, we should scan our illustrations for any irregularities, be it the things like missing body parts, like we see here with the image of the farm animals, or things that look disproportionate to one another. These are some of the biggest telltales we can look out for when trying to determine if an illustration uses pre-made elements. And oftentimes we can find a compilation of multiple of these characteristics as well. The main takeaway here would be to really look closely and with a critical eye at your illustration, especially if it is the first time we are working with an illustrator. Now, besides studying our illustrations, what could we do to prevent an Illustrator scam to begin with? So let's look at that next. Hiring an illustrator is one of the tasks most aspiring children's authors dread the most, mainly because they have never commissioned an artist before and are therefore unsure what's the norm, what's right, and what is simply wrong. So there are 4 main things we as authors can do before hiring an illustrator that can prevent falling for illustration-related scams. Number 1 is to use a Freelancer Marketplace platform. Freelancer platforms are online marketplaces where clients, in our case as children's authors, and freelancers, in our case illustrators, around the globe can find each other to work together on different projects, which in our case would be a children's book. So in essence, such an online marketplace gives us authors access to illustrators and vice versa. It gives illustrators a place to be discovered and hired or commissioned by us authors. Especially if this is our very first time commissioning an illustrator, I would encourage you to work with illustrators via such a freelancer platform. Not only do these platforms showcase illustrators' reviews from previous clients, but they also showcase their portfolio and other statistics such as whether or not their previous projects were delivered on time and on budget. Here we will also have complete control over the entire payment process because we can set up payment milestones, which allow us to pay out the money based on certain milestones as opposed to sending out the payment in one lump sum. So if you're wondering if and which of these platforms are safe to use, I made a whole separate video on how to use such marketplaces specifically as a children's author who is looking for an illustrator. So I made sure to link to that video in the description below. Number 2 is to vet our illustrator. I always encourage my students, clients, and readers to vet their illustrators before hiring one. This will take some additional time, but may prevent us from putting our trust, time, and money into the wrong person. In order to make the most of this vetting process, we will want to pay attention to 4 main things. 1 is to look at an illustrator's portfolio. If it isn't already showcased on the illustrator's profile page, ask for their portfolio and then really study the illustrations in that portfolio. Pay special attention to see if there are any telltale signs, if clip art or pre-made images have been used. One ninja tip of mine that has served me well over the years is to look for an illustrator's style. If an illustrator doesn't seem to have a specific style, but instead has multiple different types and styles in their portfolio, be very cautious. And that's because most artists develop their own style or look over the years of painting and drawing. So there should definitely be a visible way of doing their illustrations just so. 2 is to cross-check this illustrator on different marketplace platforms. Simply go to another outsourcing site and search for their profile there. Most illustrators are present on more than just one outsourcing site. So make sure to read the reviews and other information provided there and see if you can find any discrepancies. 3 is to go to Amazon and put the illustrator's name into the search bar to see what other books come up under their name. Here we can take advantage of Amazon's preview function and look inside the books. And again, we will want to pay special attention to the characters and look for telltale signs of pre-made images. 4 is to also check Instagram. Many illustrators are actually showcasing their work on Instagram, so go and try finding them on that platform and check out their profile and their illustrations over there. Going through these extra steps will help us get a more holistic impression of the illustrator we are about to hire for our beautiful children's book. Now, if you need help finding an illustrator, I have a whole separate video on just that topic. So I'll make sure to add the link to it in the description below, along with another video that covers the 8 main do's and don'ts when it comes to hiring an illustrator for our beautiful children's book. The third thing we can do to prevent a scam is to provide our illustrator with what is called an Illustrator Brief. Making use of an Illustrator Brief puts the control into our hands and greatly helps avoid an illustrator scam as well, because by providing a detailed description of what we would like for each scene, it is no longer up to the illustrator. And this in turn will prevent artists from choosing illustrations and poses that are already pre-made, simply because chances of finding exactly those images we described in our Illustrator Brief are going to be very slim. So in a way, a detailed Illustrator Brief will make it very hard for our illustrator to cheat. And to help with the creation of your very own Illustrator Brief, I have included one in my book, How to Self-Publish a Children's Book. And if you're looking for even more guidance and protection when it comes to working with an Illustrator, make sure to also check out my Illustrator Survival Kit. I have links to both in the description below. The fourth thing we can do to prevent a scam is also my biggest ninja tip in this video, and something I have never heard anywhere else before. The number one thing we can do to prevent such a scam is to familiarize ourselves with what is out there in terms of clip art and pre-made images, because the more untrained our eyes are, the easier it is to fool us. And a great way to familiarize ourselves with these types of images is to simply go and sign up for a free account over on Canva and deep dive into their elements section. Search for a couple of different elements that you might want to have depicted in your book and see what stock images are available here, making sure you select graphics in that upper menu. And we can do the same on sites like Shutterstock. Again, searching for elements we might want to see in our book so we can see what is available, so that if an illustrator ever tries to sell us pre-made images, we already have a feel of what stock images look like. I really hope you found this video helpful. Hiring an illustrator can be daunting and even overwhelming at times, but it doesn't have to be. If we are doing our due diligence before hiring an artist, we can avoid Illustrator scams and being taken advantage of. And instead of worrying, we can get excited about the progress our beautiful creation is making. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't yet. It really encourages me to keep making free videos for you just like this one. Here's to working with a talented illustrator safely and successfully. Bye!